Good morning, or afternoon, or evening, time zones. Hi, welcome to the show. Today, we are talking about Dungeons and Dragons. I know, startling stuff. Dungeons and Dragons here on the Roll20 channel. But, why are we talking about that? Because we're going to be playing some Dungeons and Dragons, and that's what's important. At least to me. So, particularly, we're going to be talking about a very specific edition of Dungeons & Dragons that came out in 1981 called Basic D&D. And Basic D&D, particularly because, as you'll see soon, there's several versions of D&D that have had that name. A specific version edited by a Mr. Moldvay. So we'll get to all the details of that stuff in a second. This is all tied into our new show that's going to be premiering in September in the Thursday time slot, the slot in which you are in now with me here, GM'd by myself, and starring an as yet not certain cast. We're most of the way there. I just don't want to promise anybody. Get your hopes up, get you all excited before we're 100% there. So you'll have to bear with me. We'll announce the cast before the show goes live. I have a couple of other things that I want to announce between now and then, but we'll get to that stuff. So, new show in September called Old School Adventures, using Moldvay Edition, Basic Dungeons and Dragons, and some cast are going to be familiar with, and some new folks. So stick around for that stuff. So, what I wanted to do, like I usually do, is just sit down with all y'all and talk about the game that we're going to be playing, why I chose it, because I don't just pick games kind of willy-nilly, right? Like, we didn't do Apocalypse World, we're not doing Burning Wheel, just, because I like them, right? Like, I want to show off specific stuff that both role-playing in general can do, and what we can do with Roll20 to make that easier and more fun to play online. So, we'll talk a little bit about how Moldvay D&D, for me, exemplifies what Dungeons and Dragons is about. It's a big claim, especially since 1981 was a long time ago. I'm functionally saying D&D hasn't really gotten any better than that, which is kind of a bold statement, but we'll clear that up. I'll clear that statement up. So basically, I want to talk about sort of the history of D&D, where Moldvay fits into that, why I've chosen to play it. Talk about some of the stuff we're going to do in Roll20, and then talk about the next steps. As well, I'm going to do a little Q&A at the end, so you can ask me questions about Moldvay, about D&D, about really anything Roll20 related. So stick around to the end of that, and we'll talk about it. So, all right, so what I want to talk about is the history. Let's give you a little history lesson. So I have some items I want to show and tell you down here, which I'm excited about. I love doing show and tell. Okay, so first of all, let's take it back. We'll take it back to 1974. Try to imagine, if you can. For some of you, 1974 was a time long before you existed. For others, not so much. 1974 predates me by about a decade, but in 74, 3 booklets came out in a little white box set called Dungeons and Dragons. They were Men and Magic, Monsters and Treasure, and The Underworld and Wilderness Adventures, and these made up original D&D. D&D came from a war game called Chainmail. It was an adaptation built into a new game, a brand new kind of game, because people had been, role-playing for a long time, but this was the first role-playing game. This was like a real new type of a game, which is very cool to be able to create a new kind of game. This is like the equivalent of, let's say, the original Dota mod being created for Warcraft 3. Taking a game that, existed, like Chainmail, modifying it and making it into something new, and then we could do this exact same experiment and follow, Dota through to, Here's the Storm, to League, to Dota 2, to all of that stuff. If you look at it, you can kind of track how all of that stuff flows. And so we're going to do a little bit about that, Dungeons and Dragons style. So, I can give you a real basic idea of that early stuff, but if you want, and this is our first show and tell item, if you really, really want to learn about early Dungeons and Dragons, there's no better place than this colossal beast, this bulletproof Bible. This is a book called Playing at the World. It's by an author named John Peterson. There is literally nobody on Earth who has done more research or knows more about Dungeons and Dragons, those early days of Dungeons and Dragons, than this guy right here. John is a brilliant author, and he has done the hard work of interviewing all these early Dungeons and Dragons creators. Check it out, this book. So this is all pre-basic stuff. This is OD&D. I'm gonna put this aside before I kill myself with it by accident. Yeah, drop it on something. So, early D&D, obviously there's a lot to it. It's the start of an era. It's the sort of brand new game that was created. And by around 1977, Gary Gygax, Dave Arneson, the rest of the team at TSR wanted to make a new edition of the game. They had realized it was starting to get really popular. It was time to move from this little box with the booklets into something new, into a game that they could do some new things with. Obviously, a lot of work had been done, a lot of fan creations, a lot of stuff made for D&D. So what they did, and this is where the timeline splits, and we're gonna follow one timeline, and we're gonna abandon another. They reconverge back in the year 2000. The distant future of the year 2000, but in 1977, Dungeons and Dragons split into Advanced Dungeons and Dragons and Dungeons and Dragons Basic Set. So Advanced Dungeons and Dragons was Gary Gygax's baby, and Gary Gygax wanted to make this highly complex mechanical monstrosity. And I learned to play D&D with AD&D, but it's very much Gary's image of what D&D should be like. It started with the Monster Manual. It was the first book that came out. The Player's Handbook immediately the year after, and then in 1979 the Dungeon Master's Guide came out and completed that 3 set of AD&D. But while that was happening, another version of D&D was being created, and this was the second edition of the white box version of D&D, called Dungeons & Dragons Basic Set. It was edited by a guy named Holmes. You might have seen this box. I don't have it because I don't really like Holmes D&D. It's a white box, kind of, with like a blue drawing of a dragon on it. So during this split, that became the Basic Set. And the idea behind the Basic Set was that it was edited by somebody who wasn't Gary Gygax. And as such was designed to be a simpler, more kind of focused introductory version of D&D. And it was okay, but it didn't go very far from the 1974 edition, and it was out until 79, and was kind of the main introductory version of the game. And the idea was that it would funnel people into AD&D eventually. Now, by the time 81 rolled around, they had realized that basic D&D was its own rule set. So there's 2 different versions of D&D now, right? So AD&D continued on and became second edition revised, the editions of D&D that a lot of people like, but that's one timeline. Now, in the timeline that we're going to be occupying, the next version of D&D, the iteration that came after Holmes' Basic Set, was this bad boy. This is my favorite D&D. You can see how well loved my box set is. Came in this like awesome pink box set, some sweet magenta. This little man down here with a spear. This really ugly looking dragon. Yeah, fucking sweet. And then this lady over here. This box smells weird. It smells like old paper. And so in this box, you got 3 things. You got some dice and a crayon. So this is a thing it came with. It came with dice, like little shitty. These dice barely exist anymore anywhere. You can hardly find them because they were so cheap. And you gotta remember, this is a time when polyhedral dice weren't easy to come by. So these kind of cheap, crumbly plastic dice that probably didn't last very long. They're not the fancy Chesic dice that we have today. And then it came with the booklet, which I'll show you in a second. And it came with an adventure. And this is where we're gonna talk about this. We're gonna talk about adventures later. Adventures are a big deal for basic D&D, but it came with an adventure. The art is classic. This is Errol Otis. All the art inside just as classic and good. And it was designed to intro people into this particular branch of Dungeons and Dragons, and it came with a beautiful magenta book that you might recognize, covered in kobolds, called Keep on the Borderlands. So Keep on the Borderlands is a classic D&D adventure. There's badass owlbear. And it came bundled in the game because the idea was supposed to be that you picked up the box set, went home, and played right away, right? Got started and was like, all right, cool. We're going to play D&D. We're going to explore the Keep on the Borderlands. That was the intention of the basic set. This is the rule book. Beautiful red book here. Same cover art there. Basic rules up top. And the reason why it had 1 and basic rules here was because the next book that came out is like a light blue box set that I don't actually have. I have the book, but it's not as good. It's called Expert Set, and it was edited by a guy named Cook, and he made the extension. This is Moldvay D&D. It covers level 1 to 3. And then Expert Set does 4 to 14. This only covers dungeon crawling. There's no rules for outside adventures. There's no rule for hex crawling, any of that stuff. This is just, you were in a dungeon, you were doing dungeon stuff, and that's it. And we'll talk about why that's important also in a second. So, Moldvay D&D, was this branch of early Dungeons and Dragons. It was overshadowed somewhat by the next version of D&D, essentially fourth edition of Dungeons and Dragons, which most people I think recognize as the red box. This is the Frank Menser edition of the game. It came with that basic set red box and then 4 boxes after. So it was basic, expert, companion, master, and immortal, and that covered you all the way up to level 36 plus. So I'm not a super huge fan of the Menser edition of the game. It does some stuff, and I don't want to go into the minutia of like how it handles initiative order and like various that business. But when people refer to basic D&D, if they say BX edition or Moldvay D&D, that's this guy. If they talk about red box, despite the fact that this book is red, what they usually mean is Menser Dungeons and Dragons. And you know that Wizards flogs this art everywhere. There's like the dragon, and you see the back of the guy with the sword. If you've ever been to a convention that Wizards is at, they had for a while like a huge dragon that you could pose in, like so you were looking like you were on that art. They re-released the cover art as part of a 4th edition promotion way back when. So Redbox, Menser, BECMI, they all got funneled into a book in 1991 called the Rules Cyclopedia. So right around the middle of AD&D 2nd edition's timeline, we got the Rules Cyclopedia, which is a cool book, but starts to get weighted down with a lot of extraneous rules. And then finally, after all of that stuff, the 2 timelines reconverge in the year 2000 with 3rd edition of D&D, and that's where we kind of see the main channel go. Until there's a little bit more confusion around the D&D essentials in 2010. But let's not worry too much about that because we're here to talk about Moldvay. So Moldvay D&D, and I think that this is shared by a lot of other players of classic D&D. It's sort of I feel like it's the purest version of Dungeons and Dragons. Now, if you know what draws me to games, you know that I like to play by the rules of the game. And well, hell, let's do the experiment, right? So, I always ask about games to determine whether or not I like a game. What is this game about, right? What's this about? What's this guy? This is about 2 things. It's about dungeons as a stand-in for sites of adventure, enclosed sites of adventure, and it's about dragons as a stand-in for monsters and danger, right? So, how is it about that stuff? It's about dungeons by giving you rules for navigating the dungeon, right? It has rules for light, for time. It has rules for getting lost. It has rules for mapping, doing dungeon stuff, right? And it's about danger by way of monsters. Now, how is it about those things? You know, from a reward perspective, how does it reward players for engaging that stuff? In basic D&D, and this is a big one, in basic D&D, you're rewarded for getting money and treasure out of the dungeon. Going into the dungeon, getting expensive shit, carrying it out of the dungeon, experience points, right? So this is a little bit revolutionary if you're used to a more combat-focused version of D&D, or you're used to games that are about, rewarding you for role-playing your character or for pursuing your character's goals. Like, look, this game has nothing in it about pursuing your character's internal, intense conflict with the world. Like, Burning Wheel is about conflict with your character's beliefs and the beliefs of the other characters in the world in general. Dungeons and Dragons Basic Edition is about going into a dungeon and getting out with treasure. And the thing is that, like, there's experience rewards for combat, but they're tiny. They're pathetic, right? It's a pittance. Combat is dangerous, combat is deadly, and you are rewarded more for just avoiding combat altogether and sneaking out with your treasure. Less murder, more hobo. Murder, hobo. The idea is that you're guaranteeing yourself success by saying, like, how successful were you? What is your loot in the dungeon? So it's really cool, and it forces characters to be portrayed in a certain way that I think you're going to see picked up by our players very quickly. There's not a ton of really intense characterization. There's a lot of, like, player level problem solving and trying to be clever about how you solve things. And everybody who's played basic D&D has a story about how they avoided combat or tricked combat, or it feels a little like Dark Souls for me in this way, in that sometimes the best approach is not to just get into hand-to-hand combat with the enemy. Sometimes it's like, climb up on the roof and throw firebombs at them while they can't climb the ladder. You want to find ways to sort of cheat your way through these kinds of things, and it makes it really fun. The other thing is that enemies and monsters and everything, they have checks, specific mechanics for non-combat engagement. When you encounter monsters, if you can communicate with them, you are entitled to a reaction check. So you find that in this game, a lot of the time, characters end up in a position where they befriend monsters because someone in the party has a high charisma. Charisma is not a dump stat in basic D&D, not by a long shot. It also allows you to manage much larger parties. My optimal character number for basic D&D is 8 to 10. So what we're likely to have is, when we play this, we're going to have 4 players, each with 2 characters, and then 3 to 5 like hirelings. So it's going to be a big party. The reason for that is lots of dying. Lots and lots of dying, right? So keep an eye out for that. There's going to be lots of characters so that we can rotate through them quite quickly. The game has rules for managing groups that big. One player acts as the caller and one player acts as the mapper. The caller in basic Dungeons & Dragons is the person who is responsible for ultimately telling the DM what everyone is doing, right? So at the table, there's lots of talk and whatever, but it's not official until the caller says, this is what everyone is doing, right? And then the mapper's job is going to be, in Roll20, and I think this is going to be hilarious, draw the map as I describe it. Now, because you, as the audience, is going to get to see my point of view, I'm going to be flipping back and forth between the real map and the player map And so we can all have the dramatic, ironic fun, and I'm going to need you to buy in for this. You can't help them cheat. Their job is to draw the map accurately. And if they can, it's going to make their job a lot easier. If they can't, well, we're all going to have a good laugh at the way that they draw the map versus... So I'll flip back and forth. I'll be like, here's the real map. Oh yeah, looking good. Flip back to the player map. Nope, I did not say that turned south, but okay, cool. Go ahead and draw that map. Yep. And at the end of the adventure, I'll let the players in on that. So we'll say, like, here's what the real map was, and here's what you did. Here's how you drew it. And it's going to be, I think it's going to be really funny. So, you know, you as the audience, you're going to have to buy in as my little GM minions, and don't tell them when they screw up the map. Don't guide them through, you know, their mistakes. It's going to be a lot funnier that way, watching them suffer. You get to be my backup DMs. So yeah, the players are going to be banned from Twitch chat, but you know, players are crafty. So yeah. All right, so that's kind of, you know, I wanted to talk a lot about how, like, you know, the game does these particular things, and you know, and how these work. It relies on player skill rather than character skill. If you can't, in a lot of versions of D&D, if you can't solve a problem, you can look at your character sheet, and your character can solve that problem for you. Much less true in basic D&D. And what we end up having happen, because people die, like this game straight up, lots of save versus death, right? You might find, I'm going to use an example from a real adventure we might end up playing. But, for example, the players might enter a room in a castle, right? And I might describe the room as being a beautiful turquoise tiled bathhouse. And the air is still steaming from the magical bath that's bubbling in the center of the room. Off to one side, about 10 or 20 feet, let's say 20 feet to your left, you can see a small piece of furniture, like an armoire. Right? And a player might say, okay, I'm going to go over to the armoire, I'm going to open it up. So you open the armoire, and I could say, all right, well, inside there's a pile of towels. And one of the players might say, oh, well, are these expensive looking towels? How much would they be worth? And I might say, okay, well, you know, each towel might be worth 5 or 6 gold. They're quite nice, you know, high thread count or whatever. And one of the players might say, oh, I'm going to take a towel. And I might say, okay, there's a cobra hiding under the towel. It bites you. Save versus poison or die. Then that's it. That's how it goes, right? So characters, like, players matter. Characters are pawns in Dungeons and Dragons. Now, D&D, basic D&D has alignment, it has law, it has chaos, and it has neutrality, but they don't really matter that much. You know, they're important for some very random stuff in the game, but not quite as much as you know, as they would be in later versions of the game. So we can throw them away. They're going to get killed. And so what ends up happening is that the characters, as they get closer and closer to leveling, they get pushed further and further back in the order, and the shittier characters end up in the front, and they need to protect the characters so that they get to level 2. I mean, let's talk about characters. Let's talk about classes, right? So your class options in basic D&D, if you are a human, you can be a fighter. Most hit points, you can use all the different weapons. Fighters are pretty tough and good, kind of generic. You can be a magic user, and magic users are great if you roll for sleep or magic missile. Magic missile is super overpowered in this version. Sleep is also way overpowered. Really useful. Magic users, incredibly squishy, often end up carrying everyone else's gear. You can be a thief. Thieves are useful. They've got all kinds of, like, thieving skills. Great damage, because they can backstab. You can be a cleric. Now, clerics don't get spells until 2nd level. So at 1st level, you're just kind of a shit fighter. But hey, you get turned undead. Level 2, though, healing magic, which is badass. Before that, though, no. Not a chance. Now, if you want to be cool, though, you want to be really cool, you could be one of the other 3 classes. You could be an elf. Yeah. You want to be an elf? It's a class. You want to be a dwarf? Also a class. You want to be a halfling? They're also a class. And they're a bit like multi-class characters, except that, like, for example, an elf is quite good at fighting and has magic. They're kind of bullshit, but it takes them twice as long to level up. Dwarves are like fighters, basically, but they get a bunch of cool dwarf abilities, like detecting traps, being able to notice how far underground they are, that kind of thing. They get infravision. And then halflings are kind of like fighter thieves. So it's weird, but it's cool. So that's a thing. So that's the kind of characters we're going to see. They're going to die a lot. One thing that I think is really interesting about the game is that the rules are fairly tightly focused on making you describe what your character is doing. Like, there's no perception checks in this game. Like, I might allow a roll if there's a chance you may or may not notice something, but if you describe your character doing a thing that would notice the thing that you would notice, I'm gonna have to untangle this in a second. You just do it, right? So, like, if I say, all right, you walk into a room and the floor is covered in white hexagonal tiles. One of the players says, okay, when we get into the room, I'm gonna get down on my hands and knees and I'm gonna, like, sweep the tiles. I could say, okay, doing that, you notice that one of the tiles is loose, right? You can't just say, I come into the room and I search it. I search it, because that doesn't fly. We don't allow that. You tell me what your character is doing. The caller explains to me what everyone is doing during that turn, and that's what you can do. Now, this is something that I find particularly kind of fun about playing this game. You can take all the time in the world, but it's my job as the GM to say, this is how long that takes. And every time you take a round, your torches burn out. There's a chance for random encounters. So while you're down on your hands and knees, touching every tile on the floor, I go ahead and roll on the random encounter table. So you know I'm going to be using Roll20 for that. There's going to be all kinds of random tables for each level of the dungeon that we're on. And it's a balance between, do we push on ahead and check this room out, moment to moment, taking our time in here, or do we risk it and we push through? Now, there are characters that have specific abilities that sort of passively activate, like thieves. Thieves can search for secret doors. Halflings can be basically invisible. Elves can detect secret doors just by passing by them. There's ways to get around that by your character. But by default, you want to be very careful and you want to be astute about your surroundings. So there's lots of ways that you can learn to be kind of better as an adventurer. The players learn how to play D&D better. And what I'm going to be doing, and I'm going to let you help me pick where they start, is we're going to be using pre-built adventures. Blasphemy. Gasp. I know, right? I'm not making up my own dungeons because I'm lazy. No, that's not true. I mean, I am lazy, but that's not why. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to pick probably 4 or 5 basic D&D first level adventures, and I'm going to create a straw poll, and y'all are going to help me pick which one they're going to play through. And the reason why I wanted to do this is because the B series modules, the basic modules, are so good. They're so good. They're weird and fantastic, and they're designed to really make basic D&D do its job. And so what we're going to end up doing is we're going to pick the module that they go on, and I'm going to run them through that module. And I want to do it because the way D&D is built, basic D&D is built, is that it's designed to be modular, right? So when we talk about a basic adventure, we're not just talking about, like, a cool map, right? We're not just talking about an adventure key, showing us what's in each room, we're talking about modulation to the rules. We're talking about things that are going to change how we play D&D. Now, this is something that we see in retro clones of basic D&D. So things like Lamentations of the Flame Princess does this exactly, where they say, okay, this is the core rule set. It's basic D&D, but we want to add on as much as we can rule-wise to make this adventure feel like an adaptation of the original rules. So there's new stuff in each rule set that we play, right? Special secret stuff. And you can carry that stuff from adventure to adventure. So if there's a table in Keep on the Borderlands that's like, what happens to your character if they piss off an NPC, that's a rule that you can pick up and you can slot into D&D forever. So if there's things that I like in an adventure, I can apply them to every additional adventure going forward. Now, again, this is something that, like with Lamentations of the Flame Princess, they do a fantastic job of this by making most of the game in those adventures. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to do that. We're going to walk them through individual adventures. So each section of this campaign is going to represent one adventure. So what we'll probably end up doing with Old School Adventures, which is why it's called that, is pick up, let's say, okay, we're going to do Palace of the Silver Princess, right? So we'll play through that until the adventure is complete, till they've like mapped out the dungeon and they've finished the job. Then we're going to put it aside. We're going to go and we're going to play, another game. Maybe we'll go back to something a little more character focused. And then when we're done, we're going to jump back into D&D, pick up where we left off, and now we're going to do Keep on the Borderlands, or now we're going to do Caverns of Thracia, or now we're going to do Lost City, and they're all super fun. So that's the structure that the game is going to go. And between adventures, we are going to have you, as the audience, vote on what the next adventure is, right? And there's lots. We could do this for a long time. So, yeah, pretty excited, right? It's cool stuff. So I want to talk about basic D&D. One more thing that I kind of want to cover before we move on to talking about kind of specific stuff from Roll20, from the perspective of that game or that system. I want to talk a little bit about the Dungeon Master stuff in basic D&D. So in basic D&D, there's functionally, if you're familiar with Apocalypse World, there's functionally the same stuff in terms of principles and agendas and that stuff, but it's not laid out that way. So let's talk about what does basic D&D tell you to do, right? What does it tell you to do when you're playing this game? So, Dungeon Mastering as a Fine Art, page 60 of Basic D&D says, D&D is not a contest between the DM and the players. So this is old school D&D, but it's not about me trying to just like fuck up the players' fun, right? So the DM should do his or her best to act impartially when taking the part of monsters and handling disputes between players. So that's a good place to start, right? So what to do when it's not in the rules. So the players will often surprise the DM by doing the unexpected. Now, Basic D&D says we're going to provide you rules for the things that matter to our game specifically. Every game of Basic D&D needs rules for leveling up, for getting XP, for getting gold, for fighting monsters, for hit points, for all of that stuff that's in the game. We have rules for that because we care about it. That's our game. Now, if your game takes a weird turn and you need rules for shit like swimming or grappling or summoning specific monsters or like conjuring the devil or you want crafting rules, the players are going to make that shit up. They're going to want that. And so here's how you handle it as a GM. The players will often surprise the DM by doing the unexpected. Don't panic. When this happens, the DM should make sure that everything is done in the order given by the outline or sequence of events being used. So stick to initiative order. Stick to what's been established. Minor details may be made up as needed to keep the game moving. All DMs will learn how to handle new ideas and unusual actions quickly and with imagination. Quite often, a DM can decide on a solution to a player's actions not covered by the rules. So it says straight up, if the characters try to do something, interpret it by what seems fair, what seems real, and just decide. Say, yes, you can do this. Right? This is a very early, very, very early version of say yes or roll dice. So basic D&D, Moldvay is saying, hey, just if it's not in the rules, just decide. You're the GM, you just make it up, right? Easy. If not, the GM can decide whether a solution will work by imagining the situation, choosing a percentage chance for different possibilities. So suppose the GM is running a combat that takes place on a ledge next to an unexplored chasm. One player suddenly decides his character has no chance to survive combat. The player announces, my character wants to jump into the chasm to escape. There may be a chance he'll fall to a nearby ledge or land in a pool of water at the bottom of the chasm. The DM thinks about the dungeon for a minute, remembers that an underground river flows through some of the lower levels, so there might be a pool below. Even so, the character will fall 60 feet. The character only has 7 hit points and is likely to die even if the water cushions his landing. However, and I love this, however, there should always be a chance to do something nearly impossible, right? So, okay, be like, looking down at the chasm, your character can establish there's about a 98% chance you'll die, no saving throw if you jump. If you jump, roll percentage dice. 99 or 100 means your character lives. Any other result means you die in the attempt. Do you still want to jump? Right? So this is where the game starts to say to you, here are your, as the GM, here are your chances, right? Here are the things that you can do to make the game fun for you and for the other characters. So, 1, there's always a chance, right? You can do it. You can always try. The GM might give, and here's the thing. Basically, the game says, if there's no rule for it, roll the ability score or less on a d20. If you got a 12 strength, anything you do with strength, if you can get a 12 or less on it, that's basically a difficult task. You can do it. Now, you can give a bonus or penalty, so I could say, okay, you need to roll a 12 or under, but you're adding 4 to for your d20, right? So it's hard, right? Roll of 1 always succeeds. Roll of 20 always fails. That's the rule, right? So the GM says, basically the game says to you, we're not going to give you all the rules, but whenever there's no rule, here's the rule. Right? And this is why you can make a role-playing game this big, right? And cover every possible thing that you need. It puts a lot of work on the GM side, but it supports the GM in doing that by saying, look, here's the next rule. The DM is the boss. The DM decides how the rules will be used in the game. A good DM talks about problems with the players and considers all reasonable requests. The player should realize the final decision is the DM's, not theirs and not this booklet's. So the rule is saying, ultimately, the DM gets to make that call. The DM gets to say, you need a 12 or lower on this die. That's it, right? I've taken into account your opinion on this. I've given you your bonus. That's fine. Let's just make the roll, right? That's it. That's the rule, right? And it says it in the game. It's not just implicit, right? Like a lot of GMs take that rule implicitly, and there's nothing in the game that says it. Now in basic D&D, it says the GM is in charge. The DM is the boss, but it also says the DM's job is to be fair and impartial, which is supported by the next pieces, right? Everyone's here to have fun, right? The DM should make the adventure seem, and I love this, the job is not the DM to make the game fun. The job of the DM is to be fair, make the adventure seem real, avoid getting stuck in long discussions about rules or procedures, move along with humor as well as excitement, right? So take into account, talk about it, make it work for everybody, and then just play the damn game, right? The thing about this is that like, compare and contrast, right? Okay, like let's say I spent 4 hours making a Pathfinder character, making a D&D 3 character, a D&D 2 character. It took me forever. I got them just right, you know? Like, I'm so into them. I'm so ready. I'm ready to play. And 2 sessions in, somebody says to me, the GM says to me, well, it looks like you got a 1 in 10 chance here. If you fail, if you can't get a 1 on this D10, you're dead. Now, I spent 4 hours making my character, so I'm going to be like, whoa, hold on. As a player, I need to fight you on this. So my investment is, I don't want to spend another 4 hours making a character. I really like this character. This sucks, right? It makes a lot of work. But in basic D&D, it takes about 4 seconds to make a character. So if you lose Joe Fighter, you can make Joe 2. And the game doesn't care if you're Joe 2. Like, it's fun. It's funny to be like, well, all right, my character died. I'm going to play my character's long-lost sister, Josephina. And she's going to come back and be like, you're the party that let my brother die. I have to avenge his death. Right? And so you can just make a new character. It doesn't matter. You lose some experience, but hey, you've got a couple of characters. And hey, it sucks, but you learned, right? Don't do the dumb thing next time. Joe 2 will be better than Joe 1. And hey, maybe you'll get an 18, right? Maybe it'll be a good time. Maybe your character will be better than your last one. Not a big deal. And then the last 2 things that make important rules for the GM is try to balance challenge. And then this is great in that it gives you this space to do this without giving you mechanics. You can watch this. You can watch this change over time in the development of D&D. We go back to that list that we made up, earlier of like the timeline of Dungeons and Dragons. Everything is balanced. The DM should try to maintain a balance of play. Treasure and danger should be more or less balanced. But some groups prefer adventure where advancement is swift. Some groups prefer a harder challenge. Talk to your group, figure out what kind of game they like, and tailor your game to that. Period. It's not like how many orcs make a 4 CR in combat encounter and how many challenging encounters to an adventure. It's just like, make the world real, but make it real within the playing choices of your players. Make it real within the preferences that they like. Don't just decide because you're the GM you want them to have a grueling experience. So that's a conversation I'm going to have with my players. And I know what Andrew's going to want. I know what John Harper is going to want. But, there's 2 other people, so we'll have that conversation. And then it's my job as the GM to balance the adventure to fit that desired space. And then, and this is great, this is one of my first sort of examples I've seen of metagaming. On B60, there's a rule called your character doesn't know that. A player should not allow his or her character to act on information the character has no way of knowing. For example, attacking an NPC because the NPC killed a previous character run by the player. So this game is almost more like playing like an RP server of like Reign of Kings or Ark than it is like playing an ongoing game where your characters are going to die. And it's on you to remember that Joe 2 does not know that Joe 1 was killed in secret by the cultist who is pretending to be the innkeeper. Right? So, metagame. It's a thing. And it defines it as player knowledge and character knowledge being separated. So it's a challenge for players to try to kind of pull those 2 things apart. So I don't know. I'm hoping that by now some of my enthusiasm for GMing this game has worn off on you a little bit. I hope that you're gonna want to tune in, and I want you to be, and I'm speaking to the Roll20 audience. I want you to be my co-GMs. I want you to be my secret backup squad. I want you to know everything that I know, and we're gonna leave the players in the dark, and we're all gonna skulk behind our DM screen together and giggle and rub our hands together and point and say, oh my, are they going to? And I want to try to find a way, if I can, during my GM turns for this, because I'm going to do prep, to talk about things in the adventure that the players can look out for, and so we can watch them blunder into traps that you know about and I know about. So things like, for example, I don't know, like a cobra hiding in between some towels. It's fun when you know that the players are in danger and they don't know, right? That's for me the great dramatic irony of basic Dungeons and Dragons, is knowing the things in the world and watching the players succeed despite their blinding ignorance. It's going to be so much fun. I'm really excited about it. So what we're going to do with Roll20, and you know, if you want to, please start to ponder. If you have questions for me about the game, I'm going to be answering some questions at the end if anybody has any. If not, that's great. I'm doing a fantastic job answering them before they show up. So start thinking about that. I'm going to talk a little bit about Roll20, then we're going to do the Q&A. So, you know, we talked about how I'm going to have 2 main screens for this. I'm going to have the player screen, which the players will be boxed into. They're not allowed out of that screen, and that's where they're going to be maintaining their map. Now I'm thinking that Andrew or John will likely end up in the mapper position because they have I know they both have styluses, they both have like tablets they can draw on, so that should be fun. We're going to get to watch them draw, you know, draw the map. But you and I, dear sweet audience, we're going to be jumping back and forth between the real world, the printed map that I have, which I'll have up on a screen, and then the poor fool's player map. And we can rejoice when they draw the map correctly. And we can lament, biting our fists as they accidentally wander into the wrong place or draw the map incorrectly. I want to get you to code GM this with me in as many ways as possible. So we're going to focus on the map stuff as much as we can in a very old school sense. So we're going to get the players to draw maps. And what's really cool about Roll20 is that, you know, if I'm playing Dungeons and Dragons at the table and I'm the mapper, you know, this is all I get. My grid paper. All I get is this space, but we're going to have an infinite amount of map space. I can just keep adding on. And at the end of the game, we're going to have this beautiful, janky map that the players have drawn. And hopefully they're all going to get in on the job of, like, you know, drawing in some extra stuff and making the map look really cool. It's what we're going to have as our artifact afterward. And I'll, of course, export it, and y'all can take a look at it between sessions. So there's that. You know, I talked already about running these classic adventures. I want to show how me as a GM, because I get this question a lot, like, do you ever run pre-gen adventures? You know, new DMs are always being, you know, guided towards, like, oh, try a pre-gen adventure, but don't really know how. So we're gonna talk about that. You're gonna get exciting things like listening to me read box text. Let me find some cool box text in here to read you. Keeping the Borderlands is too cool for box text. Here we go. You ready? So first of all, check out this badass Skeletor. All right. Box text. So, you see 2 man-sized skeletons. Iron shackles and lengths of chain are fastened around the skeleton's wrist bones. The skeletons hold swords and are advancing to attack. Yeah. Box text. So it's going to be pretty fun. Lots of, like, corny old school D&D stuff. It'll be really great. Some of it is really funny. So you can tune in for that. I'm gonna do silly voices. I've already had requests to do my Dungeon Master voice, which if you haven't seen it, it's pretty stupid, but tune in for that. And again, I think that because the challenge level is so high, we're not gonna get into necessarily like the deep characterization that we get from Burning Wheel or Apocalypse World. We're gonna get deep investment in, oh my god, you only need 100 experience to hit level 2. Saves versus death, getting shot with arrows, like watching the players slowly creep towards success because it's so hard. So keep an eye out for that. I think it's going to be really neat to watch us all get really invested in the characters as they advance. So I think it's going to be real fun. It's a nice change. It's going to be real different. You know, we're gonna do some new stuff with Dungeons and Dragons. Some new stuff for Roll20 Presents Old School Adventures. So I hope that you will come and check it out. I saw earlier on someone asked me a question, so let's do a little Q&A before we go, and then I'll talk about what the next steps are. So. Sithmaster asked me, is there downtime between adventures when the GM turns into experience for gear or equipment? Does that exist in the system? There's no specific mechanisms for that. The players will go back to town. We'll basically just be like, you leave the dungeon. Cut. You're in town. Do town stuff. Cool. Cut back to the dungeon. Once they hit level 3 and we start integrating the overland stuff, then we'll expand those rules. There's a question about, am I using coins for weight and encumbrance? Yes. Now this, Grindle, you are a pro. You've read these rules. All right, I'm using coins for weight and encumbrance. Definitely. Am I using standard damage or variable weapon damage? Okay, so this is a thing. I'll see if I can quickly find the page. It's an optional rule. This is going to blow your mind. It's an optional rule in D&D to have weapons deal different amounts of damage. There's the table. Weapon type and damage. Yes, I'm going to be using that optional rule so that a two-handed sword deals more damage than a dagger. I'm also going to be using the optional individual initiative rolls. So if you have a high dex bonus or a low dex penalty, you're going to go at different times in the initiative order. Ghost Weeble. Ghost Weeble asks over in Adam Coble chat, what are my thoughts on alignment language? Ghost Weeble always ditch them in BX. So you can learn, you can have the language of law and the language of chaos as your alignment tongues. I'm keeping them. They're too stupid not to. Yeah, they're way too stupid not to keep in. I love how dumb that is as a rule, and I want to keep it. It's going to be hilarious. What else? Some other questions. Oh, when do you know a dungeon encounter or content for this session is done, and where should someone look to figure it out? There's some other questions about like how many sessions on average does it take, that kind of stuff. I'm not sure. The last time that I ran Palace of the Silver Princess, it took us I think 8 or 9 sessions, but we'll see. It depends on how thorough they are and how successful they are. So if they're lucky, you know, maybe it won't take as long. But if they're not, if things go bad, they're gonna get messed up. I'm going to start by not using any additional rules from any other sources, but as the game goes on, depending on what the players want and depending on kind of how we go, I'm going to be introducing stuff from other supplements. So probably, you know, firearms will make their way into the game by way of either Lamentations of the Flame Princess or Miseries and Misfortunes, because they both have kind of cool firearms rules. And hey, I don't know, it's fun to have a pistol if you're a wizard. Why the fuck not? Let's go gonzo with it. It's going to be very campy, I think. The game's probably not going to be very serious. So I'm pretty excited about that. What I'd like you to do as an audience is help me as a GM stick to my rulings. So if I make stuff up, if I'm like, you got a 1 in 6 chance to do that, I hope somebody will be able to like write it down so that later I have a set of rulings that I've made. So that's a thing. There's some perception rules that I like from a Lamentations adventure that I might roll in, right? We might later on start including adventures from other games, right? I might do a Lamentations adventure, or I might do a Labyrinth Lord adventure. There's so much material for basic D&D and so many games that are related to it. I will probably be including some of that. So we'll see. We'll play it as we go. Yeah, it would be cool to have a wiki for this particular campaign because you know, I want to keep adding things to the game as we go. It's gonna be very toolboxy. So yeah, that's a thing that I quite like the idea of. Asura Setsu asks me, does flanking exist in this rule set? The closest thing we get to flanking is you get a bonus if you attack someone who doesn't know you're attacking them. And if you're a thief, that bonus is crazy powerful and lets you deal lots of extra damage. So definitely that aspect is rolled into it. Yeah, definitely going to be including some of that stuff. So if you have, we're coming up on the end. So if you have questions I haven't answered, or you think about anything, or you want to know more about it, I'm going to be obviously talking about this both on the Roll20 forum and on Reddit. We'll aim folks in that direction. So we'll start that stuff up. And what I want to do now is just bring your attention to a contest that we're running. So if you're familiar with Roll20 already, if you are, looking at making your own character sheets, we want you to make a character sheet for us. So we're doing a contest. The contest goal here is make the coolest basic D&D character sheet you can, and I'm going to pick a winner. Winner gets a 3-month subscription to Pro for free, Pro Roll20 for free. So that's a thing that we're going to be doing. And keep an eye out on both my Twitter at Skinny Ghost and the Roll20 app Twitter. Those are where we're going to be doing our announcements for the cast, start of the show, the poll for what adventure. I think we're probably going to do that one before we get started because I want to give it some weeks to roll up. Yeah, and all the usual choices. So keep an eye on those places. Soon you will get to experience with me the fantasy adventure game that is TSR's Dungeons and Dragons. So I hope you'll tune in for that. Thanks for coming today and listening to me yammer on about my favorite D&D game. Very soon we will have played my 3 favorite role-playing games, so I'm really excited about that. So stick around for that. We will see you next time. Don't forget, Burning Wheel, episode tomorrow, live at the usual time, 5 p.m. Pacific, right here on this channel. So give us a follow, stick around, and we will see you on the flip side. Later, everybody.